Hi there. For this week's podcast, we dive into some personal strategy when we're heading into the woods. We discuss how we think about things at the big picture and small scale levels while sharing stories on what did and didn't work.
That's right. We'll be talking plateaus, points, and premium temperatures on this episode as we discuss how we approach our outdoor environment, be it woods or water. As always, if you're new to our growing outdoor community here, make sure to follow us on Instagram at EC underscore hunt fish hike underscore pod and subscribe to make sure that you stay up to date on our latest episodes.
All right, thanks for giving us a listen, and without further delay, let's get into the episode. Welcome to the East Coast Hunt Fish Hike podcast. I'm Pat Carroll, hunter, fisherman, and general outdoor enthusiast. Join me and my brother Mike as we share tactics, recount stories, and plan our upcoming outdoor adventures. Welcome to the East Coast Hunt Fish Hike podcast, your home for stories and tactics in the woods and on the water. I'm Pat Carroll, and I'm joined, as always, by my brother and co-host, Mike. Say hi, Mike.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
So, me and Mike here, we're going to be talking a little bit about some of our strategy as we go into our hiking and hunting and fishing endeavors. But first, I wanted to, push our social media a little bit. We do have an Instagram. The Instagram is EC underscore huntfishhike underscore pod. So reach out on that if you have any interesting things you want us to cover, or just to follow along for any exciting news on our front. And in addition to that, rate and review. The best way for us to get into other people's ears and to climb the charts and such is by you giving us that 5-star review. So tell us how we're doing. Give us that review. It will go a long way.
Yep, and if you like what you hear, share us with your friends. Let your friends know other people that are kind of like-minded in the world of hunting, fishing, hiking, outdoor stuff. That's how kind of we make our way through the rounds and into other people's ears, as Pat's saying. So, thanks for listening, and tell your friends. And that's kind of the best way that we can kind of grow our popularity and grow our listenership. So, thanks for listening, and tell your friends.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first thing we like to do is talk a little bit about the recent activities we've gotten into in the outdoors. Right now up in New England, it's snowy, it's cold. Not a whole lot of time you can spend outside without freezing, but I did get a chance to get outside with the kiddos, do a little playing in the snow. Now, we were up in Maine, and the amount of snow in the yard up in Maine was about 2 feet. And it
Oh my
was like
gosh.
it was like fluffy powder, so you like can't really walk around. Like, we tried to sled, and the sleds were going like so deep in the snow that like it was almost impossible. So we kind of like
Yeah.
flopped around the snow for a little bit, but it ended up being fun, but not quite this sledding adventure that we were hoping for. But I did have the chance to get out and get my girls on skis for the first time. It was pretty exciting, and my oldest, she's about almost 6, and she got the skis on. She was getting comfortable. She's super confident in with the whole ski thing. She thinks she's gonna get up there and ski down the whole mountain all automatically. But ultimately, she got on that bunny hill. She went down using those skis. She did the pizza.
Good
Slowed
for
herself
her.
down. She did a good job. So it was pretty exciting. She skied probably for about an hour or so on the little bunny hill, looking to try. She was looking to try and get onto the chairlift. I told her, we gotta learn how to stop and turn before we can go up to like the top of the mountain. But she was eager about it. She did a great job. We skied for
I
about an hour.
love that. I love that confidence,
I
though. I
know,
love
no,
that
nothing,
confidence.
nothing if not confident.
Yeah.
We skied for like an hour and a half probably. And then she was starting to get a little hungry for lunch, so we, got inside, started to have some lunch, and then once we got the ski gear off, it was gonna be a tough run to get the ski gear back on. So we kind of, after at that point, kind of bailed and left it as it was, as a happy skiing experience. But for
Yeah,
our first try, it went really well. And
that's
we have
awesome.
another trip planned, actually, in another, not this weekend, but the next weekend, to go up and do a little bit more skiing, get my oldest on the slopes a little bit more, and be able to learn and get a little bit better. So
Yeah.
lots of fun.
Yeah, no, and I just there's nothing like that that like 6-year-old confidence, right? That
Oh
just
yeah.
like you can take on the world, you can take on the whole mountain. Gosh, I can even hear my voice here. This is through no fault of the podcasting equipment. If my voice is going in and out here, I've got a cold that's been making our way through the family. But even despite not feeling 100% the four of us down here in Georgia, we had a chance to take our oldest, who's 3, up to we have like a couple of parks that are right around our area. We live in kind of like a neighborhood that's pretty wooded, but we've got a couple of parks that are all in the area. One of them is like this huge, massive field. Another one is in the midst of, it's actually open container, which is kind of nice. It's got like these like 4 or 5 different parks that are kind of like around this big like loop almost.
Oh, fun.
There's a big open field. There's a big open field in the middle. And you can like take drinks out from the restaurants and stuff that are up in the area. And during the summer, they'll have like concerts and stuff that go on in the field. And then so that's kind of like another park. That's a little bit more of a drive. It would be a longer walk to get there, and which also means a longer walk home. But we have a park or a middle school rather that's really close to us, and they have this kind of like open. I think it's designed as like a lacrosse and like a soccer field, but they open it up on the weekends for anybody that wants to kind of like come on by. And there's like some families that were there playing baseball in the field. There's a couple of like middle schoolers or high schoolers that were playing soccer. There was so, um, I think like a high schooler, like probably a freshman or sophomore in high school, that had his headphones on, that was like throwing the lacrosse ball around. And so we went up there with our stroller, and we had a soccer ball and a hula hoop. And we were up there for probably like 2 hours, just the two of us. Gave Catherine a chance to be able to nurse to nurse our 5-month old. And so our 3-year-old and I were up there for like, it's got to have been like 2 hours, just like playing, hanging out, like playing make believe,
That's great.
chasing the hula hoop around, chasing the soccer ball around. So it was just so much fun. It was an absolute blast. And then of course, like walking home, she fell asleep in the stroller like within 5 minutes. She was so tuckered out, but it was so much fun to get her up there and be able to play. And I just had an absolute blast playing with her up at the field. So it was I know it's not like getting out on the slopes. There's nothing really that compares to that. It's chilly down here in Georgia, but on that day it was probably like low 50s or kind of like mid to high 40s.
That's
And
not bad.
so yeah, and so we had just an absolute blast, going out onto the field and kind of like chasing the ball around. I've got an image of her, my 3-year-old, like running with the hula hoop in one hand and like the soccer ball like underneath the other, just like running towards the soccer net. Like, I have no idea what it is that she's doing, but I've just got this image of her. It was just like so cute and so much fun. So
That's awesome. That sounds like a great time. Nice. Well, we're both getting outside doing it, even though it's cold and
yep,
in the winter. It's
yep.
pretty great. All right, so we're gonna dive in a little bit on a Q&A session, kind of as I was saying before. We'll go through some questions, some big picture stuff, and then dive down into a little bit more of the micro, a little bit more of that specific strategy. So, Mike, my first question is gonna be for you. What goes into determining a good spot?
Yeah, so when it comes to fishing particularly, and again, I've got a lot more experience on the fishing side of things. looking to learn a lot more, and that'll hopefully come up in some of the questions that it is that I'm going to be asking you, Pat. But when it comes to like a spot, when it comes to fishing, I have a couple of things that I'm looking for, and I know that you're a little bit different in kind of like the lead up to it. You might use like maps in order to kind of figure out what might be a good spot, or
Hmm.
topography that might kind of like lend itself to what it is that you think might be a good spot. In a lot of ways, when I'm fishing, especially when I'm fishing on my own, when I'm not fishing on my own, I'm not in control of the boat. So I'm kind of just going wherever it is that my either my father-in-law or the guide wants to go, which is also fun, and I can kind of like cast and retrieve or troll or whatever it happens to be. But when I'm fishing on my own and I'm out in either the kayak or the canoe, I'm like proximity to my like launch point is always important. So I like when I'm trolling, which I always want to like troll out to my location wherever it is that I'm going. Um, when I'm at my best, I'll have another pole so that if there's any fishes that are kind of like jumping out of the water, I'll be able to within like 3 seconds get a lure there. If you can't get it there within like 3 to 5 seconds, it's gone.
Yeah.
I think I've talked about that on a previous episode, but like you got to really hit it quick. So when I'm kind of like making my way out to whatever the point happens to be, or whatever the kind of the location happens to be, I'm trying to troll on my way there, just with the hopes and crossing my fingers. Can't catch a fish unless you got a line in the water. So
Yeah.
I like to kind of like troll my way out to wherever it is that I'm going along the coast. Um,
Nice. Now,
and
do you like look at like depth charts or anything like that for the areas you're fishing?
No, not necessarily. The area of like the northern part of Lake Kiwi, which is where I'm fishing the most, especially during the summer. I know from having fished it a lot, like the areas that go from 20 feet up to 6 feet really quickly. And
Hmm.
I know the areas, I know the depths pretty well for like the areas that it is that I'm fishing a little bit more frequently. Similarly, there's a spot on Lake Lanier where when I get a day off from work, I'm making my way up to, and I know the areas and I know the depths of some of those areas. So I know where I'm a little bit more likely to catch a fish than if I were just going to be like fishing blind. But I get a lot of that depth information from a fish finder that I have, and so that's it. It's funny because people use fish finders for all different sorts of reasons. Um, but it kind of like gives you two important pieces of information, right? One is the depth of like the bottom of the lake, whatever the depth is down to the bottom, so that you can kind of like see or estimate where it is that you think that the fish are going to be. And then when you do see fish that are on there, you know the depth of the fish as well. And so those two pieces of information are really important. It obviously like the depth of the water, knowing where it is that I want to be putting my line in order to be able to try and catch something that's not a catfish, is you got to kind of like know whatever that depth is. So um, that's kind of like the biggest piece of information that I use the fish finder for. So even though like I might have the fish finder out sometimes if I'm exploring a new area, not even to see if there's fish there, not certainly not to be like, oh, there's a fish, let me catch that fish. It's not really how it is that it works, right?
Hmm.
But if I can know the depth, then I can know, okay, if I want to be 6 feet from the surface, or if I want to be about 10 feet from the bottom, or 5 feet from the bottom, because that's where it is that I think that they're going to be feeding.
Hmm.
The depth ends up being important, but I don't see that on a map. I typically will use my fish finder to kind of like get that depth.
Nice.
So
Cool.
yeah, when I'm kind of like trolling along a coast or trying to like make my way to my spot, I like coastlines, and coastlines tend to be pretty good for trolling and catching fish. Um, Part of the reason for that is because like where the coast meets the water, that the depth is zero. So you automatically have kind of like a natural shallowness to that water, wherever that coast happens to be. So I like trolling along the coastlines a lot, and sometimes you can get a fish that'll come out from kind of some of that shallower water. If you're 6 to 7 feet in off of kind of some of that coastline, you'll get a fish that'll come out and will end up hitting your line. So
Right.
The coastlines I tend to kind of I tend to try and make my way to, but then when it comes to like finding like a little, but I like fishing plateaus and I like fishing holes. So like if I can find myself a spot where I know I talked about this on Lake Lanier, there's a spot that goes from like 20 feet up to 6 feet very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
So when fish are feeding in packs, like in schools, like around those plateaus, there's a like as the fish are being chased towards that plateau, they're running out of room very rapidly. And
Mm-hmm.
so these fish like to be feeding around these kind of like plateau areas, right? So if you can find an area that goes from like a deeper depth to a really shallow depth
Mm-hmm.
and then kind of like levels out, there's likely to be a lot of fish that are kind of in that leveled out area or on the slopes that are on either side of it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of like a plateau. And I like fishing those plateaus a lot. And again, you need to know what the depth is, and that's for two reasons. One, because it's an advantageous place for you to fish if you can find them,
Mm-hmm.
but also if you have a lure that's diving too deep, you're going to end up getting caught up in all of that junk, and you're going to end up losing your lures, which I end
Yep.
up doing a lot when you're trying to fish these plateaus, right? Um, so the like the depth on plateaus is good, but especially in like the morning session, like looking at like a really good spot in the morning, I'm going to be looking for those spots that are typically more of kind of like a point, right? So it's going to be really deep part of the like part of the lake, and I'm looking for where it is that it kind of like comes to a kind of like comes to a point, and thus you get kind of like that like a wall or a point or a really steep drop off, so that naturally we have a lot of fish that are kind of like going from the bigger part of the lake. That's going to be where a lot of them end up feeding.
Mm-hmm.
So early on, I like fishing the points, which is why whenever I'm fishing up at Lake Kiwi, I have the point that I always go to. It's probably like it's like a half of a mile tops from like it's around the bend, and I'll just kind of like fish. I'll troll my way in. There's
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of docks that kind of like lead up to it. So a lot of times, what I'll do as I'm kind of making my way up those docks is I'll kind of like if I'm trolling, I'll paddle my way like a little bit in and then dip my way out, and then dip my way in and then dip my way out, so that the line that's like 25 or 30 yards behind me ends up weaving in and out of these docks, because
Mm.
a lot of times that's where the fish are, right? Is they're kind of
Yeah.
like in these little pockets between the docks. So I'll go and oftentimes I'll fish that point until I either don't see any more signs of fish jumping anymore, or if I get the impression that the sun is coming up, and so I need to find kind of like a cooler spot, because at the end of the day, fish like especially in kind of like that like spring summer fishing time, they
Mm-hmm.
like the cooler water. The water sometimes up at like Lake Kiwi, it's not as deep of a lake,
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of times the lake ends up like some of that fishing area that I'm trying to do ends up being like up into the 70 degrees, and fish really like it a lot cooler than that,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like in the 60s, like mid 60s. So the I find myself kind of like always chasing that cooler water, and so I'll go from that point to try and find like a little hole. And there's a couple of little fishing holes which are kind of like indents in the coastline, and you're looking for again those spots that kind of like go from that coastline that's very naturally steep, but you can find some like 20-25 little pockets where a lot of fish that are not on the main part of the lake, they kind of like find these little hideouts, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. And so if you can find a spot that's got some tree cover, though if you have too much tree cover, you end up with your line up in the trees. The if you can kind of like get yourself into a nice little hole, that water that's a little bit deeper ends up being a little bit cooler, and if you can find a spot that's got some tree cover as well, that isn't in like the main part of the lake, the main part of the sun, you end up with a little bit cooler water there. So that's what I'm typically trying to do in terms of my strategy is I want to like fish those points where I think there's going to be a greater concentration of fish, or anywhere where they're jumping. If they're
Yep.
jumping fish, it means that there's feeding fish. So if they're not jumping unless they're feeding. So I'll kind of like be looking for that sign, troll my way to those points, and then when that fails, or if I'm not catching anything, or like kind of the sign is gone, try and kind of like make my way back up and into some of those pockets where I can get some of that cooler water. Right, so that kinda covers what it is that I'm looking for in, determining what a good spot for fishing would be, Pat, but, on the hunting side of things, what is it that kinda constitutes a good spot for you? What is it that you're looking for, and what's kinda that process that you go through in determining what a good spot for hunting would be?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, uh, it all starts with like kind of looking at the maps, right? I'll look at the maps and kind of determine that area that I think it's going to be a good like transition point from like one type of terrain to another. Now, sometimes that can be like a area that's like forested next to like a marshland, or sometimes it can be like a valley area that's like really thickly covered with like briars and small bushes and undergrowth like that, that's like right up against some like larger trees. Those type of transition areas are tend to be the areas that I'm looking for, and you can see them on the map pretty good. Different like evergreen trees, for instance, look different on a map than, say, maple trees, or like a marsh area you can usually see on a map, a clearing you can see on a map, and a lot of that stuff, you can see there, and that gives you a good place to start. Um, After that, after I look on the maps and determine these like elevation changes or these different terrain features, I'll go to that area and scout it usually. And
Mhm.
just involves me basically walking around those areas that I pinpointed and seeing if there's any deer sign there, basically. And if I start seeing the
Mm.
the sign there, that the deer are using that area, I'll go from there, and set up some trail cameras. Those trail cameras I'll usually let them sit there for like basically the whole year, gathering pictures from all types of seasons during the year. I'll take those camera pictures and basically isolate them down from different wind conditions, different weather types, to try and pinpoint specifically the area that I want to be looking at and when the deer are going to be using that area. So once I like take all that data from the cameras and correspond it with the appropriate weather data, that kind of gives me an idea of the temperature or like the season that the deer are going to be using that specific area, and then I can kind of structure my plan of attack from there.
Yeah, and just in terms of those cam pics that you're talking about, obviously these are like trail cams that you're putting up in the woods to try and capture and see when the deer are kind of like in those locations that you're thinking about hunting. This is just again like novice speaking here, but like does do you have to go through like hours and hours of footage um, for like in order you have to go through hours and hours of footage in order to try and like narrow down all that's going to be when all like the deer are there, or is it only capturing pictures like when there's movement that's there, kind of like out in front of our house I have it's like a proximity light that ends up going on if something were to kind of like pass in front of it. Is that kind of like more of what it is,
Yeah,
or
no.
are you kind of like like forking your way through like hours and hours of footage trying to see like, "Ooh, that might be a deer right there," or
Well, yeah,
how do those cameras, like, work?
it's kind of a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. So the cameras are set up with like a detector, right? So if a deer or really any critter were to walk in front of this camera, it triggers, right? And some of them I have set to take a short video clip, so usually like a 30-second video clip. Others of them are set on like burst picture mode, so they'll take three pictures in like close succession. The idea being that either the video or the three pictures, you should be able to get some image of what walked in front. Now, in theory, you'd only pick up pictures of deer, exactly the deers you want to see. In
Yeah.
reality, if you hang your camera and there's like a low hanging tree branch, you can get,
Yep.
3,000 pictures of a tree branch. And then you're kind of weeding through your photos saying, is this a tree branch picture or is this a deer picture? And so
Yep.
then you do have to kind of, sift through some of the junk in order to get to the good things. But
Yeah, that
a
makes
lot
sense.
of the times you can get them set up without trees in the way, and I generally speaking, you'll end up getting a few hundred pictures, and of those few hundred pictures, at least the areas that I'm looking at, you probably like a third of them tend to be deer pictures or so for each camera. So, and then you're sifting through those deer pictures to determine, are they there during the day? Are they there during the night? Generally speaking,
Yeah.
nighttime pictures are valuable in the sense that it tells you what deer are around. It's good to, if you're seeing a big buck at nighttime, I mean, that's certainly better than not seeing a big buck at all. But it doesn't
Right.
necessarily tell you, I mean, you can't hunt at night, right? So it helps you a little bit, but it doesn't help you as much as, saying getting a picture during the day that tells you that that deer is relatively close by, especially if you're getting multiple pictures of them.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, one kind of like difference, I guess you could say, between hunting and fishing in, well, I guess now largemouth bass are actually notoriously like very territorial, and I'm kind of wondering the extent to which deer are territorial as well, and by that I mean like maybe is there something to knowing where a deer is at night because they're always going back to the same location, and so you kind of have like a point A that you can then track back to like a point B during like throughout the day. Well, if we know they're going to be coming back here, might they go to this water source, or might they go to this location to try and eat, or like to what extent are deer territorial to the point that you can start to kind of like take that into consideration when you're hunting?
oh yeah, great question. And I guess the answer is yes and yes. The deer are territorial to some degree. So, depending on what part of the country you're in, deer will be in some areas. Deer will be very kind of homebodies, right? They'll maintain a specific kind of core area. That core area is relatively small because deer populations are relatively big, right? The more deer you have, the less area a specific deer has in order to, maintain like a safe lifestyle, right? The deer knows that their area is safe. They're more likely to, maintain that area because that's what's kept them alive so far.
Right.
As you move into like the Northeast, Pennsylvania, Maine, New Hampshire, these are areas that have, generally speaking, much lower deer density. And because of that, the deer have the ability to wander a little bit more. So they do have areas that they tend to like. They like, specific beds. But they'll use these beds, one, depending on the wind. So they'll change where they're going to sleep based on the wind to put the wind in the best advantage for them to be able to detect predators. And they'll also, especially in like the main woods and the larger big woods areas, these deers are very nomadic. So they'll potentially cover as much as like ten miles or so in like a loop, right? So you
Oh
might
wow.
see them like one day, but you may not see them again for like a couple weeks. Now, it doesn't
Mm,
necessarily mean that they're not using that area, but sometimes it can just mean that have a big loop that they're doing and trying to check different areas or different food sources over that course of time, and that can sometimes make it very challenging for you to pinpoint a specific deer.
yep. Cool.
But
Yeah.
yeah, no,
So
that's all kind of how it goes into my strategy in determining a good spot. I mean, I would say of the spots that I have, usually I'm trying to get my stand set up on a transition area where I'm seeing a lot of good rubs and scrapes, and where I've gotten good trail camera pictures recently. Generally speaking, trying to get daylight pictures, and then if I can get, since I'm using camera pictures from the previous year, generally I'll try and get up in the stand or hunt the days that I saw deer activity of the previous year, and a lot of the times that tends to be successful as well.
good. Good.
Yeah.
All right, so kind of moving into our next kind of like series of questions here, having to do with kind of like the season, and I know for fishing, pretty importantly, the time. So the difference here between hunting and fishing, obviously, when you're hunting, you have kind of just like your limited season that you're hunting in. So do you find that any time or like in the midst of that season or any time like works a little bit better than like earlier in the season versus later in the season, earlier in the day versus later in the day? How do you see kind of like time and the season kind of like impacting when it is that you're wanting to go out there, and how it is that that's impacting your hunt.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll address the first one being talking about like time of day. So deer very much are the most active at dawn and dusk. So like right before sunrise, as well as right before sunset. Deer tend to be the most active, and that's the best chance for you to see them on their feet. So that's generally why getting into your tree stand or wherever you're going to be before sunrise tends to be an advantageous move. Um, as we talk about different seasons, obviously deer season is kind of like one big season. It's especially in the Northeast, it tends to be relatively lengthy, especially during the bow season. But even within that season, there's kind of like your early season, your mid season, and your late season, and each of them have kind of their own specific characteristics. I would say early season, you tends to be less deer movement, but the good news about the early season is that the deer aren't pressured, so they're moving like a natural deer would, as opposed to when you
Okay.
start getting into the later hunting seasons. The deer have been hunted for a significant portion of the time, so instead of them wandering around, like looking for food, looking for cover, they're kind of looking over their shoulder the whole time, wondering where the next hunter is going to be, which makes them a little bit more skittish and a little bit harder to track down. As you move from the early season to like the mid season, the advantage for the hunter is that you start moving into the rut. So the rut's the breeding season for the deer. This is the time where the deer kind of let their guard down, and or they're really just looking to try and find that doe that's ready to be bred. And during this time, deer activity ramps up majorly. The buck activity also ramps up because the buck's testosterone levels spike, and they're looking to breed that next doe. And that's a really good time to be in the woods for the hunter because deer start doing kind of crazy things. They're running around the woods in the daytime, which they generally are at that dawn and dusk instead, and they're doing kind of crazy things in the woods. And then as you wind down into the later portion of the season, things get colder, and those deer start to work on their kind of standard patterns again, mostly looking at trying to fill their stomachs back up after the crazy rut time, getting a lot of food, and trying to pack on some weight as they move into the colder winter months. Um, so those are kind of like the seasons that you're like looking at from a hunting standpoint. Personally, I've found a lot of luck in like the early season and the mid season. Early season being those deer that are kind of still on that pattern, and like the mid season rut time because the deer tend to be a little bit more letting their guard down. I
A
also
little bit more a little bit more reckless, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly,
and that
exactly.
and, that's so interesting, though, because in a way, I know that you're somebody that puts in all of kind of, like, the work ahead of time and trying to kind of, like, track based off of the wind and based off of where these deer are, where it is that they're going to, and there's gotta be some aspect of a little bit of frustration there because it's like you're spending all this time tracking down where it is that they're going to be, and now they're throwing caution to the wind,
Yep.
and so they're being, I would imagine, a lot more unpredictable.
Yes.
But in the midst of being more unpredictable, I'm sure they're kind of like showing face a lot more frequently than they otherwise would, and so you're kind of in an advantageous position there to be able to, as these deer at the end of the day, they're letting their guard down a little bit more, and that's ultimately what could end up with you being able to get the cash that you want, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that is 100% what's happening. The rut is both exciting and frustrating
Yeah,
for a lot of those
yeah,
exact reasons. And one other thing I wanted to bring up, just as far as like seasons and patterning and stuff like that, is that I've found that foliage has a major effect on what the deer are
yeah,
doing. So, like for instance, in the early season, I find in the areas that I hunt, the deer are a lot more active, kind of in the woods, in those big woods areas, and I believe it's because the leaves are still on the trees. They still have a lot more cover in the brush than they do as you move into that November December time frame. Because once you move into that November December, things get a little colder. The leaves start falling off, and you can actually look into some of that thicker brush a little bit easier. So what happens is the deer, instead of being on the outskirts of that brush, or like where they would normally have cover, because the foliage is gone, they kind of like condense back into like one localized central area, of like really really deep thick like stick cover. That makes them a little bit more like in some ways can make them easier because you got them kind of condensed into one area, but also if you're not at that one area, it can be really challenging to track them down.
Yeah, and but I'll talk a little bit here. It's not quite foliage, but like downed trees in lake fishing is a huge thing as well, right? And it's kind of like a double-edged sword, especially when I'm doing as much trolling as I am, where the like you're kind of trying to because well, let me take a step back. Like downed trees can be kind of like a blessing and a curse because these downed trees or where a lot of times the fish want to hang out because they get that coverage. They're kind of like in an area. They're protected if they're inside of the kind of like a down tree. So there's a lot of fish that want to be kind of like in and amongst the branches of a downed tree, kind of like on the edge of a lake. At the same time, if you're only ever fishing into downed trees, you're going to lose every single one of your lures because that's where it is that you lose your lures is in these is inside of these like these down trees. So it's kind of that like delicate balance about trying to get that lure within 5 feet or so of that down tree to entice that fish out. But unless you're getting within like 3 to 5 feet of that down tree, and of course if you're throwing it into the down tree, you're basically lost your lure.
Yeah.
So if you're unless you're getting within 3 feet, which when you're casting is very difficult to do. It's kind of like playing with fire a bit because yes, there are fish that are there, but then if you end up getting caught in the tree, you end up getting your lure caught there. There's nothing more frustrating than being in a good spot where you know there's fish and you're spending 10 minutes of good fishing time trying to like cut your line and get a new lure on there because of the fact that you wanted to try and catch that fish that you thought might be in that down tree, you know? So when it comes to like coverage like that too, the fish love it, but they also will come out of it in order to get food. So
Hmm.
you can kind of use that to your advantage. I will only really kind of like try fishing around some of these downed trees if it's not kind of like prime fishing time.
Yeah.
I'm sick and tired of spending prime fishing time by like wasting that time trying to get my lure back.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Um, so yeah, no, I mean, ultimately, I think that kind of rolls into the next question, which is, um, for fishing. Do you find that one season is better than another? Like, are there certain seasons that are better for certain fish? And likewise, is there like specific times that are better for different areas? How does that work in the fishing world?
Yeah, so I guess I'll talk kind of like specifically about Georgia fishing and spotted bass, which is what it is that I'm fishing the most. Um, for spotted bass, they're spawning, which is kind of like the equivalent of the rut, right? There's a higher concentration of fish that are out and about during the spawning season. And for spotted bass in Georgia, that spawning seasons, there's two of them. It's kind of like in the spring and in the fall. And so you can if you're fishing during that time, you can kind of get yourself into an advantageous position. Fortunately in Georgia, it's right now, I mean it's 35 degrees, but in Georgia typically we have longer spring and fall seasons. So if you can tolerate it, you can get yourself out there and have some successful fishing. Now part of that though is that in the later fall and in the early spring, which we're kind of like just about like getting into right now, the time of day, kind of similar to hunting, that's the best for fishing is at kind of like sunrise and sunset. So again, you're looking at some of the least comfortable time to be out on the water if you're trying to be out there in the spring and in the fall time. So that is when they're spawning. The water temperature is a little bit on the cooler side, and you get um, sometimes I think that a lot of fishing is in that transition, kind of like hunting. You're talking about that transition from kind of like the marshland into kind of like that more heavily denser forest area. Similarly, in the time of the year, I think that there's a lot of that spawning that happens kind of in that spring and in that fall time, at kind of like dawn and dusk. That's when typically the best fishing is taking place, and so that temperature is going down a little bit in the water, and it's making it a little bit easier to catch those fish. Um, I do most of my fishing though, during the summer, which isn't necessarily during the spawning season, but you can still catch a lot of fish during the summer, especially when um, a little bit in the earlier summer and the later summer. In the meat, like kind of like right in the middle of the summer, it can be a little bit tricky. The other thing that kind of plays into that, obviously, time of day is super important, and the sunrise. I feel like I'm always chasing some of that cooler water, right? If the sun is rising at 6 o'clock, I want to be out on the water quarter to six, so that I can be out there when it's still dark, and so that I'm at my spot, and that I'm, or at the very least, trolling while the sun is coming up. And so for me, that kind of like sunrise time, that's the best time to fish. Sunsets can be good too. You can catch kind of like on the flip side of that, you can catch some fish as well. But I've just, especially during the summer, um, in the evening time during sunset, the water temperature, because it's been warming all throughout the day, is still pretty warm.
Hmm.
Versus in the morning time, it's kind of like it's a lot cooler and it's only just starting to start warming. Uh, so I find that I have a little bit more luck kind of at sunrise versus at sunset. But for a lot of the same reasons that you're talking about when it comes to hunting. Um, the middle of the summer can be rough too, just because of people that are coming up to the lake to visit, right? And so like the choppier the water, the more people are like on the lake. Like 4th of July and the 5th of July subsequently are not great fishing days, because there's so many people that are out on the water, that it's not necessarily the best, right? In choppy water, fish don't want to come up to the surface because it's choppier water,
Hmm.
right? So yeah, time of day, but then also a little bit in the seasons as well. So that's kind of a little bit of what I'm looking for when it comes to timing when it comes to fishing.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, what I would say, what would you consider is like the perfect fishing spot, as well as like the weather and the conditions that would play into it? Like, if you were gonna describe the perfect fishing day and the perfect fishing spot, what would it look like?
Yeah, so you kind of alluded to it right there with the weather. Overcast weather is so good because, as I'm sure you can imagine, we're talking a lot about sunrise, sunset. Um, Overcast weather basically prolongs that sunrise, and it prolongs the heating of the water. So you can kind of like catch a lot more fish that way. So overcast or even just like a little bit of a drizzle can be really good. Um, I like kind of like that early summer, or kind of like late summer, right on that brink of, yeah, you're not going to catch as much as you might in like the middle of the fall or the spring, but the temperature's a lot nicer, so it's a lot more pleasant to be out on the water, because a lot of times the wind is bigger, is more ferocious out on the open water, and you're getting a lot of kind of like kickback, and you're getting splashed, and so I kind of like the, just selfishly, the temperature is kind of nice. So that earlier or later summertime, it's kind of like time of year that I really like. As I said, kind of like overcast weather. But as I was kind of talking about before, I like kind of like trolling my way in, and making my way to kind of like a point or a plateau that I think is going to be really good. Fish there while the fish are jumping, and then make my way into, kind of like a nice little hole once once the sun comes up, or once the overcast clouds start to no longer be covering the sun. Try to kind of like find my way into a hole, without too much overhang. Some overhang is good because it gives you some more kind of like shade. Nice shady holes are great. Um, but then when it comes to like the overhang, you can lose a lot of lures, and you kind of reduce your casting ability as well. Um, but kind of like a coast with some down trees that I can kind of, like I was talking about with the docks, kind of like swerve my way in and out. Um, but and if I'm at my best, catching a fish in each one of those locations, right? So like catching that'd be a heavy day for me. But like catching a fish trolling, catching a fish at a point, and then catching a fish at a like in one of those holes would be awesome. Um, I think most often I'll end up seeing a little bit of success in one of those spots and then kind of like continue that.
Hmm.
So the what if I'm catching fish, I'm not eager to kind of like move on to the next spot, you know. And I struggle with that. I struggle with never knowing when to leave a spot, and I'm always thinking like as soon as I leave the spot, that's when I would have caught the fish.
Oh yeah.
So like I like kind of like if I catch one trolling to my spot, well, I'm not as eager to get to my spot. I'm gonna spend a little bit more time trolling.
Yeah.
Or if I don't catch anything trolling out to my spot, I'm gonna want to spend a little bit more time at that spot if I see fish jumping, you know. So kind of like wherever it is that I'm catching the fish ends up being kind of that success spot,
Yeah,
you
I
know.
think that's kind of the
But on the flip side of
perpetual
that,
that's like the perpetual struggle like with hunting too. It's kind of that question of, for me, I set up a lot of my spots so I have like a morning spot and an afternoon spot because
yeah,
your deer are going to be generally speaking using one set of terrain features in the morning and potentially using a different set of terrain features in the afternoon, because they want to utilize the wind in the best case for them. But I also find myself, if I sit someplace in the morning and I'm not seeing anything, I'm always thinking to myself, "Oh, are they at that other spot? Are they using the wind like differently than I'm anticipating? Should I move? Should I stay?" It's always that the grass is greener on the other side, trying to figure out what it's going to look like, and it's a challenge, even in the hunting world as well. So I get that for sure.
yeah, you just mentioned wind there, and like casting with wind can be kind of tricky too. But similarly, and I know that you talk about kind of like a headwind versus a tailwind in track. Similarly with casting, if you can get like the wind behind you, you can end up casting a little bit further. But when the wind is whipping around, it ends up making the water a lot choppier,
Mm.
and it can be a little bit. It can be your casting is less predictable. So wind is kind of a factor as well. Now it's not a factor for the fish because they're under the water. Besides the fact that sometimes it does get a little bit choppier, right? But for the most part, like the wind can end up affecting you on the top of the water a lot more than it does the fish. So wind ends up playing a little bit of a factor. But I know from hearing you talk about hunting, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more about kind of your perfect spot and how wind might play into that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, for as far as perfect spot for me hunting, I would say it's going to be in that area. It's going to be in that area where there's, a transition point between, one terrain feature and another, ideally right over a scrape. And then utilizing the wind in a way that the deer will not smell me while they're approaching that scrape, right? So the idea being that I can get to my stand in a way that my wind isn't carrying in the direction I think the deer's coming from. That's kind of always the goal, right? And sometimes it means that your approach to your stand has to be a little bit out of the way. Like if you think the deer is it to the north, and your easiest access to your stand is also from the north, that's not going to work, right? Because you're going to have to walk past the deer in order to get to your stand, and by the time you
Right.
get to the stand you've already blown up the whole area, right? So sometimes what you need to do is utilize a different approach area, maybe coming from one of the sides that you're not anticipating to see any deer from, in order to get there clean and without any deer hearing or smelling you. And some of that takes some trial and error, right? So you might not you might think that maybe your best approach is from the east, but really it could end up being from the west, based on where, because ultimately you don't necessarily know where the deer are, right? I mean, it's educated
Right.
guesses, based on what you're seeing and what you can read from the sign, right? So sometimes you're wrong, and that happens all the time.
Yeah.
But you just kind of you take the information that you have, and you adapt and adjust based on that information, and that's basically how you build it out. But as far as like wind and weather conditions for hunting, ideal situations tend to be cold fronts. So that temperature drop of like 10 degrees for like the high between one day and the next, it tend to be really really beneficial, because those deer, they pick up on the barometric pressure change, and and they feel that temperature is going to drop, and all the deer get on their feet because they expect a storm to be happening, and they know that they need to get some food in their bellies before that storm happens. So you tend to see a lot more activity on those cold fronts, which is not at all what I saw in my hunting season this past year. It was all
Yeah.
hot weather days for me, which was definitely not as advantageous as in some years past. But you just gotta kind of adapt, and you make it happen. So.
Yeah, I should say in terms of like chasing storms too, there's a lot of that in fishing, because a lot of times obviously it's for the most part pretty unsafe to be out on the lake when it's storming. That's just like kind of like par for the course. Um, but sometimes kind of like in the aftermath of a storm, you'll get a lot of like grub that'll end up falling down off of trees. You'll get some more kind of like debris into the lake, and you can end up the fish oftentimes in the wake of a storm like that. Will end up kind of like coming up to the surface. It might end up prolonging a little bit more of their feeding time or pushing it a little bit later, and so you can have some luck, kind of like making your way into some fishing right after the storms like that. It also ends up, we're talking a lot about transitions. It also ends up impacting the temperature of the water as well, which everything that can keep the water cool, versus being hot, like stagnant with the sun beating down on it. Anything that can keep that from being the case is going to help prolong, and at least during the summer, is going to help you out in terms of fishing. So the storms can often play an advantageous role as well.
That's cool. Do you see like when it's like drizzly rainy, is that also tend to be good fishing?
It does, and part of that's because of the sun cover. Some of that is because it can kind of disguise some of your like your lure hits and your casting. You get kind of like this drizzly rain, and like especially casting and retrieving. It's once again, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because if the fish doesn't notice your lure, then you're not catching the fish.
Mm-hmm.
You want them to notice your lure, but if you are too out of the ordinary with what it is that they are seeing, they're very skittish.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to be kind of like frightened away. So in some respects, like you need for the fish to notice your lure. But in another respect, you don't want them to notice it too much that they notice something's out of the ordinary,
Mm-hmm.
because anything out of the ordinary, they're not going to go after. So what I tend to do is I never want to kind of like scare away a fish with like my casting. So for that reason, like a little bit of drizzle on the surface of the water can be quite helpful. It also, as we're saying, lowers the temperature of the water, which is advantageous. And but there are some things that I have found more success with lures that are as close to imitating like a natural fish's movement, in order to try and kind of like capture the fish's attention in a natural way. They do have lots of lures, and my father-in-law has had a great amount of success with what are called whopper ploppers, which is like a rooster tail. So
Uh-huh.
what that is it's kind of like a larger fake fish, and you cast it. They're larger and they're heavier. You can cast these things, I swear, like 50 yards, Pat. These things they just soar. They'll just go right through. They'll just go right through your line. You can cast these things for like a country mile,
That's awesome.
and then as you're retrieving them, as you're kind of like reeling it in, it just goes like bloop 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 bloop. It's making these bubbles that are like kind of like imitating a fish in distress
Hmm.
at the top of the water. So the fish will actually come up, and you will see when it attacks a whopper plopper, the fish like jumps out of the water
Hmm.
to attack these things. So it's very very exciting, and they kind of like create these bubbles. It's almost like a bubbler as they
Yeah,
it's
no,
kind of like
I actually have used and maybe not exactly like that lure, but so I do when I spend some time up in York over the summer. Our beach house area is right on the water, so I'll get out on the rocks and just kind of cast into the cove from the rocks. Now it's pretty choppy. It's not like still water by any stretch, and it's also got a lot of seaweed. But I have used just like a standard like popper, like a saltwater popper. It's probably like probably 3 or 4 inches long, decent amount of weight, but you fish it pretty similarly. You like kind of work it across the top of the water. It's kind of like
yeah,
a,
that's
a
exactly right.
top water plug, and it kind of like pops on the water, makes those kind of bubbles. And I did catch a striper on one of those a few years back, and it hit it exactly like that. It
Yeah,
hits it on the top, which is like kind of super exciting, right? Because the fish is taking it, like you can see the fish hit the lure, which is pretty fun.
yeah,
I happened to use it at a time where there was a lot of fish that were feeding on top of the water already. Like you could see the water breaking with all the fish feeding that was happening. I like to call it like a feeding frenzy.
yeah.
But it worked. But like that's like the perfect time to use it, right? Because the fish are feeding on the top of the water, and then you're fishing your lure on the top of the water as well. It makes it dynamite for the catching the fish. So.
Yeah, that's kind of what you're looking for, right? You're looking to try and like when it comes to fishing, you need to have the right lure in the right location at the right depth
Hmm.
when the fish is there in order to catch the fish. And so anything that you can do to kind of like put yourself in a spot where you're mirroring what it is that they're already naturally doing ends up being kind of like the best time to be able to catch fish.
Absolutely. I mean, it's pretty similar with hunting too, right? You're trying to get the deer to walk by at the right time for the right wind in the right time of the year, um, you know, without you getting pegged, basically.
Right, right. All right. Well, kind of moving into kind of that's actually a good transition into kind of like getting into your spot and what all that kind of like entails. You talked before about kind of like your approach. And I've got some things that I'll say afterwards about kind of like approaching when it comes to fishing. But what kind of goes into getting into your spot and kind of on that like micro level, getting yourself ready for the hunt.
Yeah, no, absolutely. For hunting, for me, I mean, generally speaking, trying to get in early is beneficial for me. I've seen a lot of success in making sure that I'm in the stand before sunrise. Even in the early part of the season, a lot of people will say that in October you don't necessarily need to hunt mornings. But I mean, I still find it one it's like super peaceful and super fun to watch the sun come up over the trees in the stand, and in October it's not even like it's that cold either too, right? So that's awesome. um, the deer are way more active in like the early mornings. Even in October, you can sometimes hear them going back to their. You might not be able to see them if they're coming in under the cover of the dark, but you can sometimes hear them and kind of isolate what area they're kind of walking to, or where you can kind of predict where you think they're going to be headed. There are advantages, but there's also disadvantages to going in under dark. So, for me, at least in the beginning of the season, I do a lot of hanging my tree stands um, in the dark before that first hunt. So, generally speaking, I'll be getting in, around probably about an hour before shooting light, and hanging that tree stand in the dark, which is obviously more challenging than doing it during the day. Um, so that would definitely be a con of getting in, before first light. In addition to that, when you're trying to find your tree or the tree you want to set up on, doing that in the dark without necessarily having a defined path on where you're going can certainly be a challenge. I've had many a time where I've ended up inside of like a briar bush trying to fight my way out
Yeah.
in the wee hours of the morning, which let me tell you, it doesn't help you when you're trying to be quiet in the woods, as you're like punching through a briar bush. But you make your way, you find a tree, you get up, and it tends to work out pretty good. Um, I do a lot of, I do kind of a combination of like hanging and hunting as well as preset stands. So for those hang and hunt stands, I'll try and get in early so I can hang them up and make sure I'm ready before any deer are going to be walking through. For the stands that are preset, so these are stands that I have, set up ahead of time, or if there were ones that I had done a hang and hunt previously and like kind of left it in the tree. It's a little bit easier to get in, get up on those ones because instead of having to set up your tree stand in the dark, all you got to do is climb up and take a seat and you're ready to go. So it's kind of goes both ways in that regard. But I mean, for me, I think getting in under in the darkness is beneficial. Obviously, deer can't see you when you're walking through. It gives you, if you can get in but like an hour before daylight, then there's a lot of time for the woods to calm down before the hunting time happens as well. And then, as we were talking about previously, wind direction is also plays a role in that approach as well. That's something you kind of try and identify beforehand, determining what a good wind for that stand is going to be, determining what your approach is going to be. But generally speaking, trying to avoid having your wind blowing into the area that the deer are going to be coming from. Or if they are, trying to find a way so that when the deer is going to pick up your wind, the deer is at least in an area where you're going to be able to take a crack at them. But yeah, that's basically kind of some of the things I'm thinking of as I'm thinking about how I'm going to get into my spot. But as far as fishing goes, what does that look like? What does the approach look like for that? I mean, for me, fishing, I'm just kind of trying to get to the area so I can toss a lure at the place that I think a fish might be. Very very low amount of strategy going into my fishing. But
Yeah.
what do you how do you manage the approach?
Well, I have found, and the more that I'm kind of like fishing, especially these mornings during the summer, I'm noticing how important that kind of like approach is. Um, One, because it's prime fishing time, and any time that you can have your line in the water during prime fishing time, it's going to be important. So, um, I have noticed that, like, timing is key. I need to make sure that, like, all my stuff is squared away, like, kayaks ready to go, lures are packed, like, cooler, if I have live bait, is ready to go, fish finders charged, like, lines have lures on them or ready to be clipped on them, as quickly as possible so that I'm not missing some of those kind of, like, precious prime hours, uh in that kind of like right around sunrise time. So the timing really ends up being a lot of it. But kind of like as I'm trolling out to location, I, again, when I'm at my best, I'll have one line as I'm paddling in the kayak, and then another line because that's where a lot of the fish are jumping. They're jumping around sunrise and in kind of like the 15 minutes beforehand. So I like to have a line ready to go with a lure that I like, ready to try and hit it, like, if it's jumping, um, as I'm kind of, like, trolling out to location, but a lot of times I'll kind of, like, troll along the coast, but as I'm getting close to the, the spot where I wanna fish, like, for instance, in the summer on Kiwi, if I'm making my way up to the point that I like fishing in the morning, um I kinda, like, slow things down. If I'm trolling in and paddling at, like, 2.5 miles an hour,
Mm.
I'll kinda, like, slow things down to a creep so that a lot of a lot of the lines that I'm throwing out, I'm not covering quite as much distance, right? So if you can kind of like envision me with the line behind me, kind of like getting close to my spot,
Hmm.
when I'm probably about like 20 yards away or so, I'll kind of like slow down to a creep so that I can hit as I'm coming in. Because once my kayak has come through, I've disturbed the waters a little bit more.
Hmm.
My line has disturbed them if I haven't caught any fish yet. If I have caught a fish, then I've disturbed the water by catching the fish.
Hmm.
And so for me, I want to get as many kind of like on that first pass through the point. I want to get as many line hits into fresh open water as I can. And so if I'm still traveling at 2.5 miles an hour, then I'm not going to be I'm not having the same uh, density of casts
Hmm.
into that fresh water at that fresh time. So for me, I really slow things down when I'm approaching. So approach actually ends up being quite important. Now, the angle of the approach is less so important because if I'm hitting a coastline or I'm hitting a point with my line, it doesn't matter as much whether I'm hitting it from the coast side or if I'm hitting it from the like from the water side, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So the kind of like the angle, like you're talking about with hunting, doesn't play as much of a role. Um, but kind of like the casting certainly does, and kind of like as I'm approaching and getting out to that point. And I like to kind of like slow down to a creep really when I'm making my way there. And I know I mentioned this before, but I really struggle knowing when to leave a spot. I should do a better job of that. And I like I just, especially if I'm seeing fish that are like jumping around, it's just like, what's
Hmm.
wrong with my lure? Get on my lure. Like what, like you're jumping at these other fish. My lure looks just like them. Get on my line.
Yep.
So there's I kind of struggle with once I've approached an area, fished an area, sun's come up, like, and I probably should be leaving an area. I have a tendency to kind of like stick around a little bit longer than I probably should.
Hmm.
Um, and but once I've kind of like overfished an area, it's less likely that on cast 250 I'm going to end up catching that fish, but sometimes you do,
Yeah, it's
sometimes that
true.
fish just ends up coming at that time. Um, but it's kind of that mixed bag.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. No, it faced a similar struggle in hunting spots, especially when it's towards last light. You're trying to determine if it's time to start packing up, or if you can just sit it out for a little bit longer and see if a deer is going to walk by. And I feel like it's always a struggle as you get to the end of the sit. You've been sitting there for 4 to 6 hours cold, and you're saying, I haven't seen any deer yet. What are the odds that one's going to walk by in the next 5 minutes, right? But I've multiple occasions have seen it happen exactly like that. You see the deer, right as you're starting to pack up your gear, and it's proof that sometimes every once in a while you gotta sit it out. You gotta wait until that last possible second to make sure that nothing else is happening there. But yeah, I mean, moving kind of in a similar line of thought to what you were just describing, as far as fish hitting, jumping around but not hitting your lure. What are some of the things that impact your lure selection? What is how do you make some of those choices? Is it just like kind of what ones are your favorites? What ones you've had success with before? Are you like looking into like potentially what the fish are eating in that season, or like how does that kind of work for you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find what the fish in this particular area, in this particular lake, when I end up eventually fishing the Chattahoochee, like in this particular river, what are they eating? So that I can create the same effect as much as I can for trying to catch the fish based off of what it is that they're already naturally eating. For that reason, I fish far beyond the most with like fake minnow lures.
Hmm.
There's a Rapala shad that I love, and I was just it's funny, Pat. I was just kind of like scrolling on the internet here to try and find a picture of it, and I found one, and it's on the Meat Eater website,
Hey, there you
and
go.
there's a page that's dedicated to it, and it says, "Is this the greatest crankbait of all time?" Is the name of the article title. Now, obviously, I think that it is, but this is it's a and they come in different like
You
sizes.
you
The
gotta
bigger
send
the
me that
number,
article so I can read it.
yeah, no, no, I absolutely will. And I'm looking at my lure that I must have. I probably have 8 of these in my tackle box right now. Um, I love this lure, and it's like there's not even a question. It's the one that I've caught the most fish on. It's a Rapala shad, which is just it's the lure. It's probably about, I don't know, maybe 2.5 to 3 inches. They come in all different sizes, and
Hmm.
so I tend to not like them quite as small as like a 4. Like fives are even a little bit small. The 6 is what I have found, if I'm fishing to try and catch like anywhere from a 12-inch to like, gosh, you love when you catch like a 15 or a 16-inch fish. But if you're trying to get that, like, I know I've talked about like that good eating size,
Hmm.
the like that 12 to 16-inch fish, I have found that the size 6 of this particular lure works really, really well. It looks the most like a spotted bass. And so like you're essentially creating like the exact lore for it's like it's been
Hmm.
like designed for the fish that I like am trying to catch.
Yep.
And so fish eat fish, Pat.
Hmm.
And so like if you can try and find like the type of fish in minnow form that they're eating, which is exactly what this is for spotted bass. The nose that's on them, now the nose is going to determine how deep it is that it dives. So
Hmm.
the bigger the nose that's on the lure, the deeper it's going to be diving. Because I'm doing so much casting and retrieving, I like a big deep nose, because if I'm casting at 25 or 30 yards and I have a big deep nose, that means that I'm going to be able to get this thing down as I'm reeling it in,
Hmm.
down to like 10, 12 feet, like kind of like below the surface of the water, as it's kind of as it's casting and as I'm retrieving it. So which oftentimes, sometimes those fish, a lot of times spotted bass are kind of like right around that like 12. They'll come up to 8, they'll come up to 6.
Hmm.
But like sometimes you need to get a little bit deeper in order to catch that fish.
Yep.
So for me, I like this like size 6 Rapala shad lure with that big nose on the front of it if I'm casting and retrieving. Now, sometimes, Pat, that deep nose gets me in trouble when I'm trolling,
Hmm.
because now if I have that lure that's 25 yards behind me and I'm paddling at 2.5 miles an hour, and it's getting down towards 12, 13 feet below the surface of the water,
Hmm.
it is very common to be coming across areas of a lake that end up coming up to a spot that's like 12 or 13 feet.
Right.
So I end up getting, a lot of times it'll end up getting caught, just when I'm trolling. So I got to be careful with those bigger noses, with those deeper noses, when I'm trolling. But for the most part, I use a lot of fake minnows. It- just Pat, from you've inspired me to do some fake worms, which I'll use every now and then. Just Texas rigging a fake worm. Haven't had as much luck with like spinner bait, or kind of like flashes, or like spoons or
Yeah,
anything like that.
I've caught a couple on spinners, and usually, I picked up a few because I really want to try and catch some trout, and there aren't a lot of trout area. I mean, there is a lot of trout areas up here. I just haven't fished them a lot. But I've caught two very small bass using the spinners. One of them trolling. I just like tossed the spinner behind the kayak while I was paddling out to an area, and I caught the smallest fish you have ever seen. I swear it was the tiniest baby bass. It couldn't have been more than like 3 inches long.
Yeah.
But it was. I mean, it was a bass. It was just like just
Yeah.
so tiny. But I caught that with one, and then I caught another probably about a 6 or 7 inch largemouth, also a tiny bass. With them as well. So I mean, evidently I'm very good at catching very small bass with spinners.
Yeah,
Um,
and you know, that's part of where, like, the lure size is gonna end up coming into play, right? It's
mhm,
it's not a surprise to me that on these spinners that are kind of, like, meant to capture the attention of a fish, that is much smaller because smaller fish are able to there's more of them,
mhm,
and they're able to kind of, like, get that grub that's right on the surface of the water, right? So they're probably hitting that spinner, it captures their attention, and they're hitting it before they even really know what it is that they're doing. And so you can catch a lot of smaller fish that way. So it's not entirely surprising
yeah,
that's part of what it is that you're catching. But hey, a fish is a fish.
absolutely.
Sometimes I'll reel in a fish that, like, it seems as though I can't tell which one's bigger, my lure or the actual fish itself. But you know, a fish is a fish, and so if you're having some luck with it, I mean, small fish eat and big fish eat,
Yep.
you know? So if you're using the spinner and it's having luck with the smaller fish, chances are you'll get some luck with the bigger fish too.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, yeah, some other things that kind of take up that play a role, definitely the depth, just with the nose to determine, how far down it's gonna go, whether it's gonna be a sinking lure. Like, if I'm casting a sinking lure out into, like, a plateau, I'm gonna lose that lure, right? So the sinking lures, sometimes if I'm in, like, a deeper pocket, um, or I don't care what it is that I'm catching. I'll put one like a sinking lure all the way down to the bottom and just reel it up just like a little bit. Or if I'm seeing that there's fish that are down there, oftentimes catfish are the bottom feeders that'll end up coming out from the bottom in order to kind of like hit a sinking lure that you can just put down right straight down off the side of your kayak or your
Mhm.
canoe, and then reel it up just like 2 or 3 times right off of the bottom. And now you're fishing for catfish, which I love catfish. Food wise, catfish is delicious. Now they're a pain in the neck to skin and to fillet, but catfish I think are delicious. So there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with a good catfish. The guide that we go with and my father-in-law don't like catching catfish as much, but I like catfish. And so, like, sinking lures, those rooster tails that I was talking about before, those whopper ploppers, that are kind of like capturing the attention of the fish. Oftentimes, like if I uh, I like my Rapala shad like lure so much that oftentimes, kind of like fishing a new spot, I'm thinking to myself like, you know, if every time that I'm casting not that lure, I could be catching a fish or I'm not catching anything. And so when it comes to when it comes to the when it comes to those like rooster tails, a lot of times you want to be fishing those like right off of the coast or kind of like a couple of feet off of the coast to catch some of those fish that they get their attention that's grabbed by those bubbles that are on the surface and they'll come up and hit it. And I've seen my father-in-law catch a lot of fish on those. But I just love those. I like doing kind of like the research like you're saying, Pat, and finding the lore that's gonna best naturally imitate what it is that they're doing. And even that Rapala shad, it
Mhm.
does a really good job of like having a natural kind of like bobbing and weaving fishing motion.
Oh
And
yeah.
when I'm trolling with the kayak, it's uneven as well. And so I'm convinced that that's why I see a lot of successes because it captures the fish's attention in a natural way
Yeah, for sure.
rather than in kind of like using like gimmicks or something like that. Like it's capturing the fish's attention in a really natural way, and that's part of what it is that I like about that lore so much. But the casting range sometimes can play a role. Now those shads, those Rapala shads that I'm casting, you can get them out to maybe 20 yards,
Mhm.
but like those those like whopper ploppers, I mean, you really can cast things a country mile.
Yeah.
So like if I know that I want to have a lot more time with my lure on the surface of the water based off of what it is that I'm seeing a ton of fish jumping and they're all jumping right along this coast. Well, I'll probably get myself to a point where I'm casting far towards that coast so that I can optimize my time of having this whopper plopper or getting that fish's attention to try and get one to hit it, right? So the depth of the fish that I'm seeing on the fish finder will be another thing too. If I'm only seeing fish that are down at like 25 feet at a deeper part of like a pool or
Mhm.
deeper part of like a hole, well, my lure that's maybe they'll come up to 12 feet to hit at my deepest, my Rapala lure, but chances are they're not even going to see it. That's a lot of water for them to be able to see through in order to hit that fish. So chances are they're not going to end up rising to the point of trying to get to that lure. So the depth of the fish, seeing it on the fish finder is definitely something that I take into consideration. But while you're not necessarily using lures, I know scents come into play with hunting a lot. So is there anything that kind of like plays into it with scents?
Yeah, for me, I do utilize, I use some, doe estrus scent. I'll put it on my boots a little bit, or I'll put some around the stand. I have seen that does, I feel like it doesn't necessarily call the deer in, but it does kind of put them at a little bit more at ease around the stand. Sometimes, you can get a curious deer who will walk in because they think that they're smelling something. I also do utilize something that's called nose jammer. Basically, it's this spray that you put on your boots. It's like it kind of smells like vanilla, and the idea is that basically this vanilla scent kind of overwhelms the deer's nose, so that they smell like a lot of vanilla, but it kind of like confuses like because that scent is something that's relatively normal to them, but it kind of like blocks out other scents, so it kind of makes the other scents a little bit less noticeable for them.
Yeah.
So it kind of allow. It's like I mean, it's basically a cover scent, but I know from reading and listening to other podcasts and stuff, I know a lot of folks have found success with that previously, and so I've used it, and I've had pretty good success with it too. I mean, I don't think it's hurting me. Is it
Yeah.
helping? Maybe. Is it hurting? Probably not. So I continue to use it, and it makes my boots smell like vanilla. So I mean, there's that added advantage as well.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, exactly. And then as far as like fishing lures, I mean, we've talked a little bit about my tube baits or whatever, soft tube worms that I like to, I'll use those all the time if I'm fishing largemouth. For for stripers, I tend to do a lot. I'll kind of do a combination. I'll either use like live bait, and what I'll do is basically buy some frozen mackerel and just send it out there on like a bobber, basically, and see if anything's hungry, basically. And I've had some success with that. And then I've also utilized, as I was saying previously, I've used poppers pretty. I'll use poppers a lot, especially if there's any sort of like top feeding stripers action going on. And then I've also used a bucktail jig. So it's basically like a weighted hook, but it has those like basically white kind of feathery type things covering up the hook. Basically, the idea is that like as it's swimming through the water, it kind of looks like a little white fish, basically, right?
Yeah.
So and I mean I've had success with all three of those, um, fishing for striper off the coast, and it's been worked pretty good for me. As I said, for sometimes I'll use spinner. I'll try whatever. I feel like for me, I'm not married to necessarily one type of lure. If it's for you say you have a hard time leaving a spot or knowing when to leave a spot. For me, I have a hard time knowing, if it's my fishing that's the problem or the lure. So I just like kind of like
Yeah.
keep switching through lures until I start seeing something
Yeah.
that works. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is kind of what I do, and I mean I have fun doing it, and I guess that's probably what
Yeah.
the most important part is, right?
Yeah, and there's something to that too about like when you have like a full tackle box and like trying something else new, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm talking a lot about like this fake minnow lure that I use and I do use it a lot. But like at the same time, there's something kind of like exciting about finding a new lore that you like. And I'll watch some videos online and stuff, and they've got some like breaker like minnows that'll
Hmm.
kind of like they really look like a fish when you pull this thing through the water. And I'm like, I've got a couple of them in my tackle box, and I'm excited to try and kind of like on a day where maybe I catch one trolling and I catch one at the point. It's like, yeah, okay, I've caught a couple of fish. Let's try something new, you know. And that's typically when it is that I'll if I've seen a little bit of success. Now I say that now when I'm sitting like on our screen, like in our screened in porch. Of course, when I start to catch the fish and I'm catching them on that lure that I'm using a lot of, it's like, well, why would I want to do anything besides
Right.
this? Like this
Yeah,
is catching a fish,
exactly.
you know. Um, but yeah, just changing out the lures every now and then is good. But I'll get myself into that like that revolving door of these lures, and I find that I'll give it a couple of casts, but I always end up coming back to those fake minnows.
Yeah, for sure. No, I totally agree. I mean, we all have our favorites in the tackle box of what the things we're gonna reach for first, for sure, and then kind of play it from there afterwards. So that's yeah, that's great. All right, Mike. Well, we've this has been a pretty successful Q&A sesh, I would say. I
Yeah.
think we've done a pretty good job of laying out what our strategies are, what some of the you know tactics we're using, some of the lures we like to use, some of the things we like to do when we're in the woods. So I think this was pretty successful, and I think we're starting to run short on time here.
Yeah, you know, and we've got so much more that we could get into, and we will get into in future episodes. I did just send over the that link to that lore that I use,
Oh,
Pat,
great.
and I haven't read the entire article. It's pretty long actually, but I'm looking forward to reading why all the reasons why this particular lore that I already love is such a good lore. Uh, it's definitely it's gonna reduce the number of times that I'm changing out my lore. I'm gonna read through this thing, and I'm gonna be even more obsessed with my lore as a result of reading through it. But nevertheless, I sent it over to you so we can read through it together and kind of chat. But yeah, this has been fun, Pat. This is always fun. I look forward to these so much. So yeah, thanks for helping put this together, and hopefully you guys listening at home were able to take something from some of our prep work and some of this Q&A for some of the strategy and what it is that we put into our fishing and hunting, and hit us up and let us know what your strategies are and some of the things that you guys do, and we'd love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening. It's been great chatting. Certainly great listening to Mike and hearing a little bit about what his fishing strategy is. I mean, I don't fish quite as much as you do, but I'm looking to do more, and I'm looking to get better at it. So pretty excited for the summer to start using some of these new lures or new tactics that you've been using.
Yeah,
So pretty cool. But I think that's gonna be it for us today. Had some really good conversation, really really exciting topics, and I really just can't wait for it to get a little warmer out for us to get outside.
yeah.
But thanks for listening. Appreciate it, and until next time, get outside, have some fun out there. Thanks for listening to the East Coast Hunt Fish Hike podcast. If you have questions, comments, or have an idea for an episode, feel free to follow us and reach out over social media. Don't forget to rate, review, or tell your friends about the podcast. And until you hear from us again, get outside, have some fun out there.